It's my privilege to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Leo Guardado, who is from Chalatenango, El Salvador. The Civil War forced him and his mother to migrate to Los Angeles, California, where he grew up after the age of 9. He's an Lasallian alumnus of Cathedral High School in Los Angeles and St. Mary's College of California. He's worked ecumenically in the Tucson, Arizona borderlands with churches, dioceses, and NGOs, collaborating strategically across theological and political differences with communities committed to providing humanitarian and pastoral response to persons in the process of migration. His graduate education was carried out at the University of Notre Dame in an interdisciplinary Ph.D. between the Theology Department and the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies in the School of Global Affairs. At Fordham, he's associate professor in the Department of Theology. His research areas include forced displacement and the religious traditions of sanctuary, the theology of Gustavo Gutierrez, mystical theology, Gandhian nonviolence, and indigenous healing practices among migrant communities. Leo, friend, thank you for being with us, and I turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. And it is so wonderful and so moving to be here with so many familiar faces. I was just saying, I have a slideshow and I will get into it. I was just saying to Chris before you all joined, I've kind of been away from the Lasallian world for many years, and little by little, I'm starting to come back through various invitations. I was in Rome 3 weeks ago for a conference and some meetings, and I went out to dinner with Brother Chris Patino, classmate from Cathedral High School, who's now a counselor, and Carlos from Colombia. We were envisioning things and thinking about the Lasallian world that has formed us. So I just want to start by just recognizing kind of like a prodigal son, I guess, who went off and did things and eventually realizes I need to go back. So it's really good to be here. And I hope there are future possibilities and opportunities for continuing to have conversations about some of the topics that I guess that are central to my research, to my studies, etc. Before I put the kind of the slideshow on, also I want to acknowledge maybe if you've attended some other seminars, I think they may have been a little more formal, and webinars. I asked Chris if it was possible just to have more of this interaction and more of this kind of access among each other. If you need to turn your camera off, then by all means do that. I want to recognize some of you may be eating, but I'll make a more narrative presentation instead of reading a paper. And I also want to say, if you want to interrupt me at any moment, feel free to do so. This is how I teach my classes. I think when questions arise, I'm happy to stop and respond to them, and then I can keep going. What I want to share with you tonight, partly my first book deals with it. It's called Church as Sanctuary. I won't repeat the argument of the book, but I'm going to bring you into this topic. It's a topic that I think has ongoing relevance for the current state of the world and for the church as a whole. Forced displacement is something that's not going away. And so, I think thinking about this collectively, not only globally, but then how it may impact Lasallian education is important. So toward the end of the presentation, I'm just going to invite us to maybe have a conversation, if possible, about that, about what does it look like to create communities of refuge? What are best practices that are out there? What's your experience with questions of migration and Lasallian education, pedagogy, theology, etc.? All right. So without further ado, let me just share my screen and maybe tell you a bit of a story. And hopefully this goes well. Can you all see?
Yes, you're
Chris,
good.
we good? Okay. So I've titled this We the Church. Obviously, we, the people of God writ large, a sanctuary. So one thing that I want to say from the beginning, as I use the term sanctuary, I'm talking about a community of refuge. Etymologically, the word means a holy place or a place of refuge. And part of the argument that I make in the book, it is the holy is constituted by practices of refuge. We often think of just refuge in a church and four walls, but really at the heart of it is a community who accompanies persons threatened with deportation or persons in the process of migration. So let me start with my own story, because I think this is what makes so much research in our lives, things that we give our lives to, meaningful. It's trying to work out our own histories oftentimes. Some of you, if you know me, you know that I'm from El Salvador. Chris said that I'm from Chalatenango. If you know some about Chalatenango, it is where one of the two places where the Civil War was really fought between the military and the guerrillas. So the other would be Morazan, two northern parts of the country. So that's me at the age of about 7 or so, from the mountains. And I increasingly, whenever I start a lecture, wherever it may be, I say I am a child of the mountains who now is far off in the north, and for most of my life now in the United States. But growing up in the war, I was born in 1981. We did not have either running water or electricity. So I come from a very rural context, and that's a context that has marked me. And at the age of 9, my mother and I got on a bus and essentially started heading north with a group of 15. I was the youngest. If any of you have read the book called Solito, it's got all kinds of awards. It was in the New York Times. Javier Zamora is the author. Solito is the name. And it's a story of a boy at the age of 9 coming north on his own. I was with my mother in a group, but it's a great story if you want to understand a bit about the migration journey through a child's eyes. A month later, we arrived in Los Angeles and started life. I knew 2 words of English at that point, which my mom knew: thank you and I'm sorry. And that's the beginning. So that's 1990, let's see, 1991, the beginning of life in the US. My mom started working for a family, cleaning their home. To this day, 30 some years later, she is still doing the same thing. She cleans the house of a wealthy family in Northeast LA, in the Eagle Rock area. And her boss one day said, I want you to go to a Catholic high school. And that's how I got to Cathedral. Brother Lasalle Basong, some of you may remember him. He interviewed me, and by the grace of God, I ended up at Cathedral High School. And that's really the beginning, I would say, of the rest of my life, my intellectual journey, my vocation as an educator, my interest in theology. It begins with the brothers, in particular with Brother Lasalle. Obviously, I was undocumented throughout high school. Hardly anyone knew that I was undocumented. Not even the brothers knew at that point. And I applied to college undocumented. I did well in school. I played sports. And so I realized I can't get federal aid. So I only applied to private schools. I ended up going to St. Mary's College because I strategically was able to use a scholarship that I had received from a school in the East Coast with a full ride of Swarthmore University. And I went through another brother, De Sales Perez at St. Mary's, and I said, my mother earns $9,000 a year. I can't afford to come to St. Mary's, but it's a wealthy institution in the East Coast that's giving me a full ride. Is there any way that St. Mary's can match that? And Brother Sales went to Brother Craig Franz, and they agreed that they would give me a full scholarship. And since I could not work, I was put under the essentially a work study, but it was a stipend of kind of on the brother stipend, which would be the equivalent of whatever I would be getting through work study. All this to say that the brothers were able to figure out a system behind the scenes, really, for me to be able to have an education in a Lasallian institution, in a Catholic school, which is what I was hoping to do and stay in the Lasallian world. I start with this story because to me it's an example of the kind of creative thinking that can be done to create these communities of refuge. My story is just one, and there are many other stories here. I believe Brother Michael Meister, I think I saw his name, is here. When in 2001, when we finally had an opportunity to get our papers, to get legal status, I had to show up at a court system like the next day. And Brother Michael Meister, I did not drive, I did not have a license, I couldn't. He drove me down, literally like overnight. So the brothers have been integral in living that mission with undocumented communities. And I think I'm just one statistic and one among many, many other students who I'm sure they've helped behind the scenes and not in public. So I just want to start off with that personal touch and saying thank you to the brothers. Thank you to the commitment and the preferential option for the poor that continues in the institutions. Okay, let me say a few words about where we are in terms of church teaching on migration, just a bit. I'm not going to summarize much. Then I want to tell you a little about the 1980s sanctuary movement, show you a video. Then I want to tell you a little more about this tradition of sanctuary that no longer formally exists in the church, but it did for about 1700 years. And then we'll end with some questions, I said, and maybe a discussion. Pope Francis is, I would say, the most prophetic figure when it comes to teaching on migration in the history, I would say, of the church. Pope Leo is positioning himself to follow in the same steps. But Pope Francis literally made migration the center piece of his papal teaching. I'm going to quote from catechism homily. It was really on these one of these Wednesday audiences. He said, I want to talk about a catechism of the desert and of the sea." And essentially, he wanted to provide teaching on migration on the spot that could guide our ongoing thinking about this issue. In the European context, this is the statistics as of today. There are almost 33,000 missing migrants, mostly from boats that go down in the Mediterranean trying to get to Spain, to Italy. There's church involvement in all of this and trying to rescue people. I said just 3 weeks when I was in Rome, I met with a young priest from Rome who's the chaplain of the boats that go out to try to rescue people, and the popular movements, which is something that Pope Francis started. The relationships between the Vatican and popular movements are really getting involved as well at a more structural level in responding to this crisis or this reality. 33,000 people since 2014. So this only increases every year. 2 years ago, it was about 28,000. So just want to provide this as by way of the context in the European section. So we're not looking at South America, North America, Asia. So just in Europe, there in the Mediterranean. As people try to rescue or meet and save lives in the Mediterranean, clearly there are other boats who are trying to push people away. So this is just one of the quotes from Pope Francis from that. This is in 2024, August of last year. He said, "It must be said clearly that there are those who work systematically and with every means possible to repel migrants. And this, when done with awareness and responsibility, is a grave sin." So his moral teaching from his papacy clearly locates the actions against migrants and the preservation of their life as within the category of moral theology as a grave sin, personal and structurally. He goes on in this document to talk about the way that essentially people are disappeared. He says, in the time of satellites and drones, there are migrant men, women, and children that no one must see. They are hidden. The technology allows us to literally see everywhere these days through surveillance technologies, but it is not used to rescue people. So shifting from the Mediterranean, if we go to the southwest border, this is just statistics from 2024. So only January 1st to December 31st of last year. 162 remains were recovered. So I just did the screenshot today. So you can see the red dots is where the remains were recovered last year. There are many, many more remains that are just not recovered. They're never found. Bodies are broken up, animals tear them apart. People vanish into the desert. Um, I looked so this year, the fewer number, I think it was 83 when I looked earlier today for 2025. But when you accumulate over all of these years, we're talking also about thousands of people in the southwest border passing away, dying, disappearing, and just remains, bits of their bodies are found. So another just quote from Francis here. The Lord is with our migrants in the Mare Nostrum, in our sea. The Lord is with them, not with those who repel them. And one of whether you like it or not, one of Francis's strong points is that he said things rather directly and created this either or reality. You are either saving life or you are participating in structures of death. For him, there was very little neutral ground upon which you could stand on this issue. And he kept arguing about the need for refuge for those who flee from war, violence, persecution, and various disasters. In fact, in 2015, September of 2015, during the Syrian war, he said from the Vatican, open up your churches, open up your convents, open up your schools. And in the Vatican, that they took in Syrian refugees. I think that's the most direct appeal that he made during the papacy for practices of sanctuary, that our homes, our religious homes, our schools, our places of education, all of these communities that exist within the Roman Catholic world ought to also be places that receive those who are forcibly displaced. And like I said, part of the theology there is it is in the receiving them, it is in that encounter that holiness is enacted in history. This is two paragraphs from one of his last statements to the US community. On February 10th of this year, 2025, you may have read he sent a pretty direct letter to the US bishops, but really to the whole Roman Catholic Church in the United States. This is when J.D. Vance talked about Ordos Amoris, the right ordering of love, that we have to take care of our people first. And Francis essentially responded to J.D. Vance and to the situation that was taking place in the United States and kind of said, no, this is what church teaching is. So I just have two paragraphs here that speak to this reality. He says, paragraph 3 and 5. Likewise, Jesus Christ, loving everyone with the universal love, educates us in the permanent recognition of the dignity of every human being, without exception. In fact, when we speak of infinite and transcendent dignity, we wish to emphasize that the most decisive value possessed by the human person surpasses and sustains every other juridical consideration that can be made to regulate life in society. Thus, all the Christian faithful and people of goodwill are called upon to consider the legitimacy of norms and public policies in the light of the dignity of the person and his or her fundamental rights, not vice versa. In other words, there are some norms and public policies that have no legitimacy when looked at from the perspective of human dignity or from, I would say, just notions of human rights or church teaching. This was Francis appealing to the conscience of Christians in the United States, saying the laws and the policies are changing rapidly in your country. Think twice whether they are legitimate and how you will position yourself vis-a-vis them. And then I'll just read from number 5. This is not a minor issue. An authentic rule of law is verified precisely in the dignified treatment that all people deserve, especially the poorest and most marginalized. The true common good is promoted when society and government, with creativity and strict respect for the rights of all, as I have affirmed on numerous occasions, welcomes, protects, promotes, and integrates the most fragile, unprotected, and vulnerable. These 4 words, welcomes, protect, promote, integrate, are the core teaching of Pope Francis on migration. These are the 4 verbs. He started to use them in 2017, and to the end of his days, they continue to be the 4 categories that structure all of his teaching on forcibly displaced persons, migration, the role of churches, schools, etc., in relation to migration. Okay, let me continue. Oh, all right. Let me now just take you through a kind of whirlwind tour of what happened in the 1980s with sanctuary movement, because that's the most recent point of reference for this concept of sanctuary. And maybe some of you were involved with it, or I'm not sure. So this all started in the deserts of Arizona, Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. And it is where a group of Salvadorans became lost while they were migrating in 1980. I'm going to show you a video. It's about 5 minutes, and then I'll show you some other slides to kind of fill in the story.
This photograph of 19-year-old Dora Rodriguez was splashed on the front page of newspapers across the globe in July 1980. A gruesome scene, bodies scattered around her. 26 El Salvadorans fleeing the country's civil war crossed the border into the Arizona desert.
Oh, yes. Yeah, this is me.
Half of them died.
My poor mom, it was all over the country, of course. But my name was in the list of the people who died.
Back home in El Salvador, Dora's name was on yet another list, a target of the death squads. When 3 of her friends were captured and killed, she fled. She escaped death there, but her hopes and dreams of a life in the U.S. nearly ended in unimaginable horror in the Arizona desert.
And I remember like it was yesterday. It's just amazing how that can stay with you after all these years. This is the post.
We went with Dora as she took another journey into the Arizona desert. This one, a journey nearly 40 years back in time.
Not even being told that we were going to go through a desert. See, the smugglers don't tell you where they're going to take you.
We went to find a small, homemade memorial marking the spot where so many died.
Because it's very scary. It just looks just the same. So it's very dangerous. As soon as you get here, it's flat and everything looks just the same, so you don't know where you're going. That's what happened to us.
The group was abandoned here in the harsh desert, a desert they'd never seen, in 115-degree heat they'd never felt, with only a gallon of water each.
How long did that gallon last?
A couple hours. It was gone very soon because it was extremely hot. Extremely hot.
Only 6 hours had passed when the heat claimed its first victim.
And we hear her crying and asking for help. But within minutes in the dark, it was silence. So she was gone the first night. So we knew we were more in trouble.
As the sun rose on day 2 and the temperatures climbed, their Mexican coyote abandoned them.
People had no water already. So the older people would start fainting and crying and desperate.
So desperate, they began drinking their own urine to survive.
So he said, drink orange juice. And I did. I got the first sip and I threw it back because it was not orange juice, it was urine. So while I was asleep, they have decided to pee in a gallon of water so we could drink that to survive. Got it?
The coyotes had told them they would be quickly picked up at the border and flown by helicopter to be reunited with family.
Yeah, some women had some high heel shoes.
Women had high heels?
Yes.
Trying to get across this desert at night?
Yeah, because we were not told.
What was supposed to be a short walk turned to 4 days in extreme heat as they wandered aimlessly in circles. Little did they know they were just a mile from the highway and rescued.
Can you imagine this at night? We're just
trying to do this?
Yeah, we were just holding each other by hand. Be careful.
Not just at night. During the day, we wandered for an hour, lost, before we finally stumbled on the memorial.
Oh, I thank God we found it.
It marks the place, too tired and weak to go on, where they decided to rest.
This is where the 9 women and the coyote were found.
They were all dead.
Yeah, they were all dead right here.
1 large cross and 12 smaller ones. Oregon Pipe does not allow memorials, so they hope the smaller the display, the better chance it will remain.
So I'm glad that we came and paid respect.
She cleans, repositions the small plywood crosses, and brushes away the debris, especially from the 3 pink plastic roses she placed there for the 3 sisters, 12, 14, and 16 years old, who were told it would be a fun trip on an airplane to be reunited with their parents.
I feel that I failed them, especially the sisters, because they believe in me. and they thought I couldn't help them. But I was in the situation just like them. I couldn't get up, I couldn't move. I couldn't even open my eyes. All I hear is screaming, yelling, help me, help me. When it was so silent around us, because almost everybody was dead. And I woke up to the sound of helicopters and horses. And I remember waking up to a face of a border patrol. I remember him forever. And he told me, don't fall asleep, don't go to sleep, please stay with me, stay with me. My heart hurts because this is never gonna stop.
As she now, some 4 decades later, watches others come in caravans, she says she feels helpless.
And it's very humbling to me because why would I tell him not to try when I did try, right? I have no right to tell him not to.
So Dora lives in Tucson. She's a friend, and she has she started an organization to help migrants coming over. As she says, people are going to keep coming. I can't tell them not to come. People will come for all kinds of reasons, searching life, new life, opportunity, etc. So again, the question, and this is a very living question in the borderlands, what do we do to receive people or to just not abandon them onto their own? This event that you just saw this video about from 1980, they became lost on July 4th of 1980. This hit the news across papers in the country. This is the moment when an everyday citizen said, what is going on in El Salvador? Why are people coming over? Why are they crossing the desert? Oscar Romero had been killed already earlier that year, but the 4 American church women had not yet. They would be killed just about 6 months later, which would be another key point in the consciousness of U.S. citizens asking again, what is going on in El Salvador? Why are people coming over? And the survivors from this tragedy in the desert were going to be deported. So the survivors were taken to the hospital in Tucson, and then Border Patrol was about to deport them. And the bishop, the bishop of the Catholic Church, the Presbyterian Church, and other lay leaders got involved and said, you cannot deport them. There is a war going on in El Salvador. And that intervention of the church and of people in the community stopping their deportation and saying, we will provide their legal assistance. We will shelter them in the church. We will provide food and basic necessities and so forth. That becomes the start, really, what ends up morphing into what they call a ministry of sanctuary, or a sanctuary ministry. So this is Romero, I said. This was March earlier that year. These are the 4 church women. As you know, were killed in that December 2nd, when they are remembered. This is just photographs from the event that started all this, the Dora, I believe that's Dora. One of the key people who got involved with this whole process of organizing the community and to respond and not let the Salvadorans who have survived be sent back to El Salvador is this guy. His name is Jim Corbett. He had a philosophy degree from Harvard. He was a Quaker and a goat herder, so he knew the deserts really well. And he also knew about the long tradition of sanctuary. And he essentially said, we need to help people not get caught. So essentially, we need to help people avoid capture, because the US government was capturing people right away from Central America and deporting them right back to a war, which by international humanitarian law is technically illegal. And so he said, if the government is going to keep doing that, then we can't trust the government to actually do its job and abide by international law. Then we have to just help people not get caught. That's the beginning of, I said, the network that starts. When he tried to speak with a jailer there in Tucson about, said, how can you just send them back? And the jailer just said, you can't get involved or relate to them personally, or you'd lose your mind. The jailer continues, I'm not responsible for what's happening to them. I just do my job. Corbett writes that when he heard those words, I just do my job, his mind just went back to another point in history, which was really the capture of Jews during the Nazi era. And so he kept working toward the creation of a network or a system that could provide protection for people coming over. And I think this is a quote that captures so much of what he felt was at stake in either doing something or not doing something in relation to people whom the government was sending back. He says, if the churches continue to ignore the Salvadorans' desperate need to avoid capture, the American public will continue to see the refugees rather than their persecutors as illegals. So Corbett's clear. It is the government that is engaging in illegal actions, not the people. So much more than the fate of the undocumented refugees depends on the religious community's participation and leadership in helping them avoid capture. If the right to aid fugitives from government-sponsored terror is not upheld in action by churches, regardless of the cost in terms of imprisoned clergy, punitive fines, and exclusion from government-financed programs, I think we can all relate now as institutions try to figure out how to respond to the current administration. He says, the loss of many other basic rights of conscience will certainly follow. No one who lives in this century can have missed that lesson. Again, he is seeing what's happening in relation to migration and people being sent back. He's reading it in relation to Nuremberg, in relation to deportation of Jews, and that moment in history. Another key figure who got involved is John Fife, who was a Presbyterian minister who continues to do work down at the US-Mexico border. And the two of them kind of began to create this network that eventually extended across the United States. They spoke of this network as a sanctuary of God for the oppressed of Central America. And it literally went from southern Mexico to Canada, from San Francisco to Boston. From monasteries to universities to schools to churches to synagogues, they were places where undocumented persons who were helped, who were crossed over, were placed for weeks, months, as they figured out how to integrate into society. This is just some of the literature that arose from this. The sanctuary movement, I said, really kind of started with that event that I showed you the video of in 1980. But the public beginning of it was 1982 on the feast of now Saint Oscar Romero, March 24th. He became like the patron saint for sanctuary. And it continued throughout the 1980s. It kind of faded away in 89, 90 because the laws changed. But this was a decade of lots of the production of literature, of art, of songs dealing with this movement. Sadly, only about 5 Roman Catholic bishops publicly supported the movement. And just by point of reference, there are 400 some Roman Catholic bishops active and retired in the United States. There were also only 3 US bishops who went down to Oscar Romero's funeral when he passed away. So this was really, I'm going to say, a lay movement of the Catholic community. And undergirding, kind of the philosophical undergirding of what they were doing is this notion that they were taking initiative to uphold the fundamental norms of a human society, even against the government threats. And they called it civil initiative, like civilians taking initiative when the government fails to do its job. I think it's just a gem to keep, I think, to keep in mind. When governments fail to do their job, what is the responsibility in a democratic system of the people? Okay. So I mentioned already that much of kind of Nuremberg is behind this. And I think this was part of what undergirded the sanctuary movement, this way of thinking. The fact that a person acted pursuant to order of his government or of a superior does not relieve him or her, we would say them, from responsibility under international law, provided a moral choice was in fact possible to them. So we have a moral choice to act in virtue of the preservation of life and of humanity, even when it's rendered illegal by the government. I won't go into this, but the Gandhian nonviolence was also at the undergirding their way of seeing it, that if you respond to the immediate needs of a community in your local place, that is real political power. I mean, that is where real political change begins to happen. And this is where I think if we think of our schools and what we can do in our educational institutions, you can start to see how do we start living the society that we envision in this particular space. because that will ripple out in society. In 1985, the people who were involved in sanctuary, the key leaders, were taken to trial. The FBI had infiltrated the movement with a spy named Jesus, and it was called Operation Sojourner by the FBI. Sorry about that. And anyway, so that even made it even go bigger in terms of nationally and internationally. Let me just summarize briefly in about kind of 5 minutes, and then we can open up for some discussion. What happened with sanctuary? Like, what's the tradition of sanctuary within the church? I said the 1980s is when this came to life, really, with 500 churches of various denominations, but about a third of them Roman Catholic. 1980s is when this became part again of the ecclesial consciousness, so what it means to remember this tradition. The irony of this is that in 1983, when the new Code of Canon Law in the Roman Catholic Church was published, this is also when sanctuary disappeared officially from the church. So let me just tell you this story. The earliest references that we have to sanctuary in churches, or asylum in churches, or refuge in churches, these would be all synonyms of it, is from Council of Bishops in the year 343. This is the time when bishops themselves were being persecuted because of Christological controversies, the Arian kind of threats. And so some bishops had to flee their own diocese to go to another diocese and seek refuge. But not only bishops, but also other non-clerics were also seeking refuge, women from forced marriages, etc. So in this council in 343, one of the canons, or one of the decisions that is made by this bishop's council conference, is the following: that a bishop should make his intercession for those who are oppressed by disadvantages in life, or the afflicted widow, or the exploited orphan, essentially the poor. And since it often happens that those who suffer a wrong, or who as offenders are condemned to exile or an island, or at any rate receive some sentence, flee to the mercy of the church, that was the code for sanctuary, mercy of the church, they are to be given relief, and forgiveness is to be asked for them without hesitation. The forgiveness here would be in Roman courts. A bishop has to go before the court and actually intervene legally, which is what we're seeing now. Bishops in various dioceses are actually going to the court system to intervene in deportation cases. So there's echoes to this, but so the earliest reference we have to this is 343. So the Council of Serdica sets up the framework for the role of bishops in relation to people seeking refuge in religious communities, in churches. It did not establish it, though. This was already a practice that had been going on, but it was codified in the 300s. I'll skip this. It's a quote from John Chrysostom. He's one of many other key figures in the 4th century who really spoke in defense of sanctuary. Augustine also, Ambrose of Milan. So many of the major theologians have references to sanctuary. Two things, I guess, from this time period. The bishops and the theology of the time affirmed that the church, again, the church, the people, the bishop, the cleric, but the people of God, have a responsibility of manifesting the mercy of God by defending those who seek refuge. In other words, when someone seeks refuge, it was very clear through a sacramental understanding, like, you are providing refuge to Christ. This is not figurative talk. This was literally a theological reality, a sacramental understanding of those who sought refuge. And it was very clear that these kinds of actions were going to have repercussions upon bishops and upon churches. Like, there were going to be consequences. Okay, you were going to have to risk something. And there's homilies, Basil of Caesarea, for example, who says, take me to jail, but I will not forfeit what is my duty as a religious leader to do. Okay. All right. This, we're talking 400s, this gets codified in the 500s into canon law. That's when canon law begins to emerge. And then it gets codified for the next 1,000 years through the medieval ages in different countries and different regions. And it stays in the Code of Canon Law of Roman Catholic Church. The last formal reference of it is in the last code, which was 1917. In the 1970s and 80s, after Vatican II, there are meetings that start taking place about updating the Code of Canon Law. And the question was, well, do we need sanctuary? Should we keep it around? The Code of 1917, which I said is the last reference to this right, said the following: churches enjoy the right of asylum, which implies that criminals seeking refuge therein may, except in case of urgent necessity, not be taken out without the consent of the ordinary or at least the rector of the church. Here it says criminals, partly because by that time, the tradition had been kind of limited to people seeking protection from the law, because the law essentially was going to get them killed, kind of death penalty. But the tradition at its root, and really how it played out for most of history, was much more than the criminal lens. It was really anyone. Although in an age when migrants are considered criminals, or they are made into criminals by the law, you could say that this way of framing it still applies. So let me just say with this slide. So by the 1980s, when those committees met, first one in 1971, the next one in 1979, debates took place. Do we need it? Do we not need it? One person in the committee said we should keep it. Said like, let's just keep it and codify it even more. And this person gave the example. Do we believe that embassies have this particular space of protection? And people said, yeah. Embassies have immunity, right? He said, well, the tradition of embassies as having of being a place of sanctuary, a place of refuge, that comes from this church tradition of sanctuary. So if embassies are recognized as a space of immunity, then why not churches? And why don't we think of churches in a way as embassies of the church? And there could be actual protocols for people who to seek refuge. Others did not agree. Someone said, laws have been humanized in our day, and we no longer need sanctuary. And what happened is they just eliminated all reference to sanctuary. So in the 1983 Code of Canon Law, which is the current code that we have up to 2025, there is no reference for or against canon law. Or for against sanctuary or asylum in churches. It has just disappeared. Why do I think it's important, and why is this worth mentioning? Because it gave the right to people, to churches, to consider the spaces, a communal space, as a place of refuge. So for 1700 years, you could turn to the code and say, this is part of our tradition. I don't think that you could have a legal right in the modern nation state for churches, but it could be reframed as there is a responsibility by faith to respond to the protection of life. As Pope Francis does, remember the 4 verbs: to welcome, to protect, to promote, and to integrate. So at some point, I would love for, I'll keep chipping away at this at the Vatican, for the responsibility of refuge in churches to be reintroduced into canon law as a way of remembering this tradition. Okay, so this is more or less what I'd said. So as we think of Lasallian schools, we got about 15 minutes left. Lasallian communities, places of refuge, asylums. I started off with my own story, how in many micro and macro ways, I was able to go to a university, and I was able to have a very good Catholic education because of the brothers, because of individual brothers, but also because of the Institute and the ways that they chose to respond when they realized that I did not have papers, that I did not have legal status. I'm wondering, as we think about our institutions, I mean, I don't work in a Lasallian institution, but I am informed by one, and I am in relationship with institutions. What can be done? Just by point of reference, in other Christian traditions, United Methodist, Evangelical Lutheran, Presbyterian, and Episcopal, they have put into their polity, into their legislative kind of codes, that those congregations can provide sanctuary or refuge if they feel that is their call. Roman Catholicism is not touching the issue at all, even though most people who seek sanctuary or refuge in churches, even for a day, a few days, are Catholic. The Episcopal Church, in fact, has developed sanctuary insurance. If your church or congregation pays $100 more for your insurance policy, you will be insured for $100,000. for your legal fees or whatever else you may need to carry out your ministry, your religious duty in one sense. I think it's a very creative way of responding. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here, but if working with undocumented populations creates a risk in Lasallian education, is there a way of also thinking about insurance policy with insurance companies where you pay a little more and you get insured for any legal fees that may arise? I'm just kind of putting things out there. At the heart of Sanctuary is a community that provides refuge and who accompanies. It is not really a church. It is not really the school. It is the community that provides sanctuary. We are sanctuary to each other. We receive each other and protect each other. That is at the heart of it, the protection of life of another person, and then what happens in that encounter and how one's own life is transformed. It brings trials, it brings risks, but it also, I think, opens us up to the mysterious and salvific grace of God. If we still believe that God acts in the midst of our daily life and our actions, then we trust that when we stand with the poor and the marginalized, the excluded, and those who will be deported, that somehow the grace of God will come through and open up possibilities unforeseen to us. So I think it's part of where we find our identity as a people of God in a world where mass human displacement is only getting worse. We are now at 122 million forcibly displaced persons. In 2012, we were at 45 million. From 45 in 2012 to 122 million in 2025. Just imagine where we'll be in 10 years. So random questions, but what are some of the best practices for accompanying undocumented students in Lasallian institutions? Is there a network of Lasallians who strategize on how to respond across institutions to students and their families? How do we think beyond the United States in creating access for forcibly displaced or refugee students? And what is the experience of undocumented students themselves in Lasallian institutions? I said, when I was in high school, I did not tell anyone. I didn't know if it was okay, if it was safe. So I just kind of carried that with me. In this conference in Rome 3 weeks ago, one of the things that I was trying to invite us to think about is, we have this international baccalaureate. It exists, so you can go through high schools and it's recognized globally. What if there were a network or a way of creating on-ramps to Lasallian education for displaced populations? Or, I don't know, just thinking globally, what kinds of global accreditation bodies can be worked with to create access for refugee populations, displaced populations, or just the undocumented populations within the United States?
Thank you, Leo, for your wisdom, reflection, invitation to look at our own Lasallian community within the framing of sanctuary and being communities of refuge and accompaniment. Your insights and ideas are a challenge and an encouragement to us to look at our charism and mission and the beauty of our church's tradition and teaching in this regard to guide us. So thank you for reconnecting and continuing to connect with this part of your story.
Yeah.
And as we look ahead in the new year, mark your calendars for January 20th at 6 p.m., 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, as we'll welcome Dr. Michael Radachik, Professor and Director of Business Intelligence Programs at St. Mary's University of Minnesota, to talk about all things AI and education with us. A link to register will be included, and more information will come soon on lasallian.info. And if you have ideas or feedback on today's webinar, please reach out to Sarah Layton or myself. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you again to each of you for taking the time this afternoon, evening, morning to join our webinar today. Live Jesus in our hearts
All right.
Forever.
forever.